Okay, our final speakers for the day are going to be talking about the financial risks of aging and financing your longevity. We have with us Michael Curran, a Texas attorney and entrepreneur. He focuses on using legal technologies and using them to address social issues. He's working to grow Guide Change. It's an early stage business that seeks to minimize financial exploitation of vulnerable populations through a cloud-based platform. And then we have LeahCohen, is a care manager at ArrangeCare PC, and that is a private Austin care management practice which helps guide older adults and clients with special needs through a maze of services that are available. So they are going to speak to you about financial risks and financing your longevity. Would you help me welcome them?
Hello. I really want to thank you all for being here. The last speaker of the day, it's a tribute to all of you.
Yeah, hopefully with two of us, we'll be able to keep you awake. I know it's going to be hard. But so today we're going to talk about financial risk management for caregivers. And our agenda today, we're going to go through kind of identifying and understanding some of the risks. We're going to talk about scams and fraud and things of that nature. We've got a lot of examples of that, how to prevent a lot of financial losses, and then also your responsibilities as a financial caregiver.
How many of you consider yourself financial caregivers? How many of you feel that you've received training on being a financial caregiver? How many have taken on being a financial caregiver or a CFO in later times in your life that you weren't always in charge of your family finances? This is a new project.
All right. So we'll go on.
Okay.
First, we'll talk about some of those risks. And, we've got some examples of risks. These are a little bit tough to read, perhaps. But the types of financial risks that people are concerned about: running out of money, health emergencies, obviously, your family situation can be a major risk factor, the fraud and exploitation we'll talk about, and denial of care, and then impaired capacity and the issues that causes. Leah, do you want to talk a little about these? I know we're going to have some more slides and go through them all in detail.
Well, among all of us as caregivers, as well as the person that's receiving the care, and we're all both of them at the same time, is trying to maximize our resources and make sure we don't run out of money, right? And a lot of us want to have legacies to children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, but also we want to balance having enough money for the person that's the identified person that needs care with also the other people that may need care in the future. And especially if we have children or grandchildren with special needs, it's particularly an issue. And the biggest unexpected expense in longevity is what? Health care, right? Mm-hmm. And that's changing a lot in the future.
Quick example here of what might be a case that gets you into financial trouble. You want to walk through this?
Oh, sure. It's a wonderful 80-year-old couple. The wife has dementia, and the husband is the caregiver at 84, and they're struggling to pay for care. They have resources, and they have some defined benefits, but they're limited, and almost all of us are limited in our resources. Is there anybody in this room that has unlimited financial resources? Probably not. One way to incorporate some money into your finances is to obtain a reverse mortgage, right? And so you can get a reverse mortgage and get a quick infusion of money, or you can do it and get a monthly amount of money. And in this situation, this couple received their money in a lump sum. And what happened is the son had a .com company that just needed some money to be able to become a millionaire, right? And this happened around 2008. Everybody remember 2008, don't we? Anyway, turned out that his brilliant idea wasn't quite as good as everyone thought, and he went through the money. But the other piece with a reverse mortgage is that in order to have a reverse mortgage, you have to be able to live in your house, and you have to be able to keep it up, and you have to be able to pay taxes. Well, in this situation, the older couple spent and they gave all the money to their son, and they didn't have the resources to keep the taxes or keep up the house, and they lost the house. And that was just a heartbreaking situation that I don't want to happen to any of us or our loved ones.
Yeah, and is that kind of an extreme example, typical?
Oh, it's a very extreme
Very
example.
extreme. Yeah.
But a lot of us make some, it's a slippery slide when we're looking at money and looking at how money is available within a family, right? We're family members, we're all making and balancing need and resources and who needs what, especially in intergenerational families and households.
Okay. So the number one fear, there's been a lot of surveys out there, number one fear of people when it comes to money is just running out of money. And wasn't really on our agenda today to talk about benefits, but I know that's something you do a lot of. What can people do to try to maximize their benefits and minimize the chance of running out of money?
Well, the first thing to maximize benefits and to minimize the chances of running out of money is to plan, right? Mm-hmm. And you should look at all the resources that are available. I mean, how many of you were active service members? How many of you are career servicemen? There's aid and attendance services. There's very specific criteria for using aid and attendance services. TRICARE, if you have a child with disabilities, is very important. Pat Brody, is she here with the Area Agency on Aging? Stand up, everybody should see her. She is, Brody, excuse me. She is your new best friend. The Area Agency on Aging has a lot of services that are available and can help with navigating benefits. Long-term care insurance is something that we should all consider. And also, in terms of families, looking at families and looking at services, not to be afraid to look at benefits and look at Medicaid and Medicare as services in advance of when you need services. Don't wait till the last minute. If you can do a little planning, you have more choices.
So healthcare is a major cost. There's been some studies done recently. If you're an average man, age 65 or older, you're out of pocket costs, not covered by insurance.
Currently.
$190,000 is what you can expect to pay the rest of your life. A woman is going to live longer than the average man, $215,000 not covered by insurance.
And that's not dementia, that's not long-term complex care dementia expenses. It's really amazing if you're looking at out-of-pocket expenses and deductibles as well as medications.
Mm-hmm. So that time frame was if you're age 65, how much it's going to cost you over the rest of your life that's not covered by insurance. There's some studies out there that show that a good third of that is in your last year of life, and of all the money that you spend in your last year of life, a third of that is in the last month. So, it really starts to kick in a lot more later.
And I think it was 2016 are the statistics that they're looking at for healthcare. But this is not complex long-term supports and services. This is regular acute care with some long-term care, but it does include some non-medical home health.
Family situation, how can that be a financial risk factor?
So people are living longer and they're living more complicated. Talking about forgiveness, talking about families where people have been married more than twice or 8 times, like the example that we saw before. Can you imagine children and ex-wives and everybody getting together and their estate planning documents? I mean, it would be amazing. But it's really important to understand that that has to be taken very seriously, that if you have a complicated familial situation with stepchildren and children with disabilities or grandchildren with disabilities or even a spouse with disabilities, or you get a divorce and the spouse has disabilities, it just makes it more complicated, and it also increases the risk for undue exploitation and undue influence. Housing arrangements, there's been a lot more now. The last time I saw a statistic was 2014. It's gone from 10 to 20% now that intergenerational families are starting to live together. And there's more potential for problems if the children come back to live with the older adult and they're financially dependent on the older adult than if the older adult lives in a financially stable family. But it's hard all the way around.
Okay, we're going to kind of shift gears a little and move on to financial exploitation and undue influence and look at those in a little more detail. And so let's talk about kind of what that is. Leah, how do you define financial exploitation? What is it? Who commits it?
Well, what's really disappointing is financial exploitation is when somebody uses somebody else's money that isn't theirs. If it's not your money, you're financially exploiting someone. And there's a lot of statistics and research on financial exploitation, and unfortunately, family members are the most likely to exploit family members, and they're part of the problem, but they're also the trusted advisor and part of the solution. And the best way to ameliorate that is to have transparency. We also paid caregivers, neighbors, scammers, people that call on the phone. Every time I talk about difficulties with caregiving, people have a story to tell about a family member. And I mean, it's really heartbreaking to think that as you get older, you're more likely to be exploited. And the over 85 population is more likely to be exploited than any other age.
Yeah,
They're also the fastest growing population.
And I'll say that anybody can be a victim of fraud or any kind of identity theft or anything else. But there are special laws on financial exploitation. So if it's a vulnerable group like seniors, people over 65, or if it's people with special needs or children or something like that, the laws are in place to where it is a special crime, and the punishment that you receive for committing fraud against a vulnerable population is is a more severe penalty.
When it's adjudicated, but most of the financial exploitation and undue influence is what? That gray area, right? It's like, well, it could be, is it a bad decision or is it a problem? And that's where most of us live.
So a few statistics real quick. They did a study, this was a survey of financial caregivers of what they thought was the annual losses from financial exploitation per year, and it's over $36 billion per year.
Billion.
Yeah, and that's divided up. There's the traditional scams by people, you just scam con artists and things. There's people you trust who are taking advantage of you. And then there's also legitimate businesses out there that target seniors. And it's kind of divided up about a third each into that. Another statistic is out of elder abuse in general and financial exploitation being the most popular example of that. Only 1 out of 44 crimes are actually reported. So why don't they report these crimes?
Why do you think people don't report these crimes? They don't want you to take away their independence. They're really embarrassed. If it's a family member, they want their money back, but they don't want that person to be hurt in any way. It's really a struggle, and it's really a moral dilemma and a conundrum.
Yeah. Okay, some of the risk factors that make someone vulnerable or as a possible victim?
Well, the one that people didn't understand until within the last 8 years, since they've been able to do PET scans and there's a lot more research on impaired capacity, is even though people's fluid intelligence and conceptual intelligence decreases, their confidence in their ability to manage finances remains strong or increases. And that's different than what people had thought about in the past. And they had thought that people were more likely to be victims of exploitation if they were isolated, if they were alone, if they were women, but that's not the case. And the research has shown that men are just as likely as women to be victimized, but for different reasons and in different situations. All of us have heard about the opioid epidemic and substance abuse and traumatic brain injury. A lot of people that are experiencing traumatic brain injuries, they're also victims, but they're also perpetrators too, right? These people have these disabilities, and who takes care of them? Their older parents, and their older parents are really struggling about what to do in terms of being able to have the resources to take care of them, as well as having the resources and safety to take care of themselves.
So how many people out here have ever got a phone call at home from somebody claiming they're the IRS or claiming they're a grandchild? Anybody receive those spam phone calls at home?
How many times a day do you get them? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So one thing I'll mention now is a little out of order, but there are fixes to that. They've gotten a lot better at the technologies to try to block those phone calls. There's an app out there called Nomo Robo, and it's actually comes free with your Time Warner or AT&T or your landline, basically. So your landline, you can go and you have to kind of go to the website of that company and adjust your settings, but it will block the robocallers. Robocallers get basically filtered through another filter before it rings at your house, or maybe it rings at your house once and then it stops. And I put the Nomo Robo service on my home phone, and it cut down those calls 90%. So it's fantastic. That's a great app. And then I'm trying. Oh yeah, so pulled it up real quick. Good job on the AV back there. No, this updates automatically. So
It's wonderful.
are you, this on your home line or on your cell phone? Yeah, I've never done any adjustments to that, but I think the criminals are also getting smarter, and they're trying to overcome that. And there's multiple competitors out there. I'm trying a new one right now for a cell phone that's called Hija. It's like Hija, and that does a little better job of trying to ID who's calling you, and it seems like it's getting about 50% or so accurate, which is better than nothing, and it's free. So it tells you, possible scammer, telemarketer, and stuff like that for about half of the ones that I think are.
The big thing right now with scammers is that, remember, we're not going to show our Social Security number anymore, and our Medicare numbers anymore. They're starting to ramp up that we're getting new cards in the mail. It's really important to understand that people are calling and saying, if you need information or you need to give me your information over the phone and we'll help you, or we'll help you for a fee. It's really important to understand that the government only talks to you through the mail. They don't call you on the phone. They don't email you. So it's really important that for all of your people that you remember that and explain to all of us and remind all of us that we don't give our Social Security number out over the phone. We don't give our Medicare numbers out over the phone.
Yeah, so the National Council on Aging, I know that's a resource you rely on.
My favorite.
Right? Yeah. They've got a great list.
NCOA.org.
Yeah,
Sorry.
they've got I'll let you talk about it all you want, but I was going to just say they do have, one of the resources is a top 10 list of scams. Yes, sir? Got a question?
More of a comment than a question. If you don't recognize the phone number or you don't recognize the person's name on your phone, don't answer it.
Yep.
And
Excellent point.
probably 80% of the calls that I get that have just a phone number and not a name are all scammers.
Or it says unlisted.
I just go no. I don't answer it at all. If that's a friend of mine, they'll leave voicemail.
Exactly.
That's what I do as well. And if they don't leave a voicemail, that's fine. And they've got, if you're caring for someone who's really struggling with this, and you mentioned you get a few calls get through on the Nomo Robo, there's some more expensive services. One's out there called Telecom, and that's it's pretty costly. I think it takes over, you pay them a monthly fee of like $40 or $50 rather than paying your phone line. So it becomes your phone line. But then a caregiver has complete control and can go in and automate only these numbers can go through to that service, can go through to the person. And if the phone rings, for the person that's receiving the care, it'll ring to the caregiver first, and they can decide whether to patch it through. So there are some higher dollar. That one's called Telecom. It's a Dallas-based company. But yeah, there's some pretty nice high-end ones if you get into serious trouble.
Do you know the resource to stop junk mail?
Yes, we do. We have.
Will you replay? What was the question?
Oh, do you know a resource to stop junk email or junk mail?
No, junk mail,
Snail
snail mail.
mail. You wanna go?
Well, the National Consumer Commission, we have some of these resources, I think, on this. I have to look because we've done a couple kinds of presentations. But again, if you just put your name on our mailing list outside, then we'll send you whatever, and just put a note about what you want. We'll send you that information. Just a quick note to go back to the National Council on Aging.org. They have a lot of resources like that, as well as AARP. And if you're looking for benefits and resources, the National Council on Aging has a benefits app that's wonderful. it's a national benefits app, and it's not perfect. I'd say it's about 70%, but it gives you an idea of some services and benefits that you may be eligible for if you fill out the information. It's a wonderful organization.
Yeah, and I did think there is one company out there, and I can't think of the name of it, but they're designed to try to take you off of magazine subscriptions and try to take you off of catalog subscriptions and that type of snail mail. Is that what you're talking about?
I have a situation, I'm actually have power of attorney and caregiver for a woman who got, the Publishers Clearinghouse thing in the mail. She set up her account to automatically pay him $25 a month.
Yeah, okay.
And it's whatever reason she thought she had to pay this bill.
Why don't you talk to us after, and
Okay.
let's put our
Yeah,
heads together.
So it's preventing junk mail from coming in that they
And-
think is, and how many of us have received the same thing? Your car warranty's about to go out.
Exactly.
You have to pay for this, and while I have.
Magazine subscriptions.
And could you address the one thing that for those who still have access to technology, even the caregivers, that's still working, is the call from the technology specialist that says your Microsoft system is about to go out, and we want $399 because your system is just going to crash. It's been in play now for 12 years because it still works.
Absolutely.
lot of
That's a very good, that's another example of financial exploitation.
Yeah, so, it's not just complete con artists that they're considering a type of exploitation. It's also legitimate businesses. So there's businesses out there that target seniors, and it's something that's not in their best interest, but they're trying to sell them products anyway because they think they can get away with it, sort of like the Publishers Clearinghouse. Exactly.
If you can, when you're looking at financial instruments and thinking about purchasing annuities and different kinds of financial instruments, if you look and see, ask people specifically, who do you give referral fees to and who do you get referral fees from? And those always aren't specific. It's not always a bad thing, but it's something to know when you're looking to evaluate whether something works well enough for you or it's or they have a fiduciary responsibility to you. That's a big difference.
So, of course, there's all the exploitation by the strangers, but a lot of times, and actually the majority of times, the person taking advantage of seniors is a family member or someone they know, like a caregiver or something like that. And a lot of times, that's called like undue influence, somebody putting pressure on somebody to do something they shouldn't do. And it gets real tricky in these situations where there might be some mild cognitive decline or something like that to tell the difference between undue influence and just a bad decision. Like somebody wanted to waste their money, they had their money to waste, and they thought they'd spend $5,000 this weekend and went out and did that. And how do you deal with those situations?
Well, I'm sure all of us know that you're able to give, what, $14,000 a year to a child tax-free. That's part of the tax laws right now for I don't know how long. But some people can give each child that much money. Some people can give more money. And some of us have children that are wild childs, right? They're the ones that always get in trouble. They're the ones that we're always bailing out. And as we get older, it seems like their problems get more. And a lot of times what happens is family members really don't know the extent to the amount of money that one child is getting from a parent. Siblings are shocked when you actually look and add up all the money. And I'm not going to ask anybody to raise their hand, but we all know about this struggle that we all have.
Yeah, it's real tough. One of the interviews I had with another lawyer was talking about a particular case of his where, the mother had given, several $100s a month to the daughter And then the mother, later developed Alzheimer's and started to have decline, and the daughter kept taking the money. And so, it's a real gray area, and it was difficult for that lawyer to try to figure out whether that's acceptable, because that daughter's relying on this money and she's unemployed and the mother's always giving it to her, or whether he needs to cut it out.
Okay. And when you're looking at undue influence, you're looking at substitute judgment as well as best interest. And you also have to balance that out too, especially if you're a responsible other or a trusted advisor. And if it's not your money, it's a crime. And looking at sole benefit, looking at who does that money help.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different, we talked about power of attorney, you mentioned power of attorney, a lot of different documents that you can get, but in the wrong hands, these documents can be dangerous. But, you need to find, the summary is, they are important documents. You need to have them. You need to make sure that the people who you trust have them and that they're used properly.
If the person that has a power of attorney and is the caregiver had no knowledge of the individual's situation regarding filing income tax, what is the liability for that caregiver that holds the power of attorney?
That's a really good question, and you should see an attorney about your specific situation. That is very case specific. It's very important, especially if you're looking at public benefits in the future.
Well, but you're not, when they die, are you liable for their taxes?
Again, you need to talk to an attorney.
So that's not a federal IRS question you can
No,
answer.
well, it could be, but again, it's very, very case specific.
Okay.
And I should also say that, repeat after me, I am a social worker, right? LCSW. I am not a CFP, a certified financial planner. I am not an attorney. I am a really good social worker.
We'll skip ahead a couple since I know we're going to run short on time. And let's talk about kind of prevention and what you can do to try to prevent any kind of financial decline. So looking at our model here, we know just from regular aging, much less Alzheimer's disease or dementia or anything else, your financial decision-making capacity can decline. I mean, it's usually shown as like an upside-down U, the curve, of which your capacity is like at its highest based on your familiarity with how to work how finances work versus your mental acuity. It's like 55 is the top of the upside-down U. But as you're that infant and growing up in your teen years, it goes up very fast. And then on your last few years, it typically goes down. That's just, an average person. So your need for support does go up typically over time. And these are some steps you can take along the way and when you want to take them. We'll start looking at those. So planning.
First of all, you got to face reality. How many of you have really taken a look at your family and done a risk analysis of if there's going to be a problem and what the problem is when you're developing your estate plans? And really encourage people to develop estate plans. It's hard. A plug, again, we receive no referral fees. We give no referral fees. But Age Your Way by Debbie Pearson, a colleague that's a care manager, is a wonderful resource. She's written a book and a workbook, and I really recommend that you consider it. There's a lot of other really good ones on the market, but that's a good one. Write goals and plans and develop an inventory of what your what financial and benefit and resources are. Identify a trusted advisor over time. Usually it's some kind of a relative. It would help if it wasn't a spouse, if you're both really about the same age, but sometimes it is. And you need to work together, as some of us that have been married for 60 or 70 years have done our whole married lives. And get help when you need it. Know when you don't know the answers, and really understand your insurances. How many of you have actual copies of all your insurance? How many of you have read what they give you and what you don't? It's really important to understand that. How many of you know your income? How many of you know your regular and irregular expenses and how your money is invested? Those things are really important. And those of us that say, I'm embarrassed about money, or, oh, I don't do money, you can do this. You can learn it.
Okay, and then after planning, how do you preserve your money and, try to make sure, as you're kind of moving on, what are some of the next steps you can take?
Well, to develop a budget, a concrete budget. If you really don't have informal supports and services for trusted advisors, really trust companies, the Arc of Texas, there are financial resources and services available, special needs trusts, attorneys. I can't say enough good about attorneys, and really, this is a personal bias, but I think you should use NALA attorneys, National Elder Law attorneys, that are certified and licensed as being able to work with you, and estate planning attorneys. And just because someone is an estate planning attorney, if you need very complicated trusts and income generation skipping trusts and all of the different kinds of more complicated legal instruments, be sure that they have experience with them.
And we talked about a couple of the technologies already, the Nomo Robo and the telecom. Another one I'll mention is TrueLink Financial, and that's essentially a prepaid debit card. So if you have somebody that probably shouldn't be able to write a $10,000 check, but they still need to get around and they need to spend several $100s or a few $100s a week or something like that, this TrueLink provides a great,
It's great.
senior-friendly, prepaid debit card, and you can really control how the money is spent and put limitations on that debit card specific to the person you're giving care for.
If you're going to get financial information and you're going to purchase financial instruments, I'm a big proponent in paying for the planning with a CFP, a certified financial planner, where you pay an hourly fee. You do not pay a percentage of what you purchase. It's something really important to seriously consider.
Okay, and after you've got some systems in place, then you need to kind of monitor everything and look for changes over time. You want to talk about that?
Well, looking, Cherie talked this morning about agnosia, and agnosia is also when people don't really understand that their capacity is, they're losing some impaired capacity, and it's really important sometimes to have a trusted advisor or a child, even if the child or another person can't actually move money, if they can just look at it and be able to question it. There's been a new law passed now that that financial institutions, they can have someone on file that they can contact if they see something that's happening unusually. And there's more and more laws now that are putting financial institutions on notice that they have a responsibility. So trust but verify. Okay.
Okay, so if you do notice something's gone wrong, then what do you do about it? One of the first things you do is you report that, and that's not always as straightforward as it seems. There's different places you can report to.
Adult Protective Services is a good beginning. The police are a good beginning. 911, 211, 311, the Attorney General's office, investment fraud, the Texas State Securities Board. They've been successful in at least stopping additional things from happening. They're not so good about getting money back, and that's the big issue is our clients, people can take $30,000 or $130,000 or $300,000, but if a person is older, they don't have the time to get the money back, do they? Not, well,
And just like most of us will need, health care at some point, most of us will need, someone to help us with our financial care as well. So what do you,
yes, sir.
what are some of the early things you do when you're reaching that point where you need? Oh, sorry.
Shared a joint account with my mother, and she had mild cognitive dementia. And because I was a signer on the account, I was able to go to the bank and talk to our financial advisor there, and he put a flag on the account that if there was a check she wrote over $50, he would call me.
And that's great. Sometimes people don't have a son like you. Sometimes they don't even trust a son like you. Sometimes somebody can bring the person with them and they can say, oh, don't pay any attention to that red flag. Sometimes they don't see the red flag because I realize Michael doesn't understand this, but not all technology is perfect and things get overlooked. There's also, I think it was, I want to say 2015, Texas was the first state in the country to have supportive decision-making. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Those of us with developmentally disabled people or intellectually disabled people, there's a form, there's a financial instrument that helps people make people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and they're using it for people with dementia to be able to show what kinds of decisions they can make and to talk about the limits of what they're fiduciarily eligible for.
Leah, can we have the slide, the one slide back to have
Sure.
all those numbers?
Oh, sure.
Just for a couple pictures.
Getting a bank account and getting to be a signer on that bank account is a great thing you can do.
Could you go back
I
one
think
more?
we already did. I think. Oh,
Yeah,
this number.
this one?
Oh, this slide. Okay. Okay, you got it.
And I just wondered if it would be possible if we could get a copy of like the notes of these slides.
Sure.
I can't
Absolutely.
write as fast as y'all are
Sure.
going.
We got some cards up here with the email address on it. Just email us and we'll be happy to forward you anything you need.
We'll give them to Christian, or we'll give at the Alzheimer's Texas, or we'll give them to Riverbend. We want you to have them. One thing, if you go forward a couple, I want to talk about this. How many of you have heard of the psychiatric directive, health directive? Okay, that's a real important declaration for mental health treatment. That's a very important document that a lot of people don't use with estate planning. And that's what people use for care when they're not able to make medical and some financial decisions. And so you use it in advance and you fill it out and say, in the event I can't make decisions, this is what I want to happen. And I guess I'm a big proponent of it, and it's very important for you to look at it.
Yeah. In general, the substituting the decision making, guardianships is what Texas considers to be the last resort now. That's when someone's making decisions that are against their best interest repeatedly, and just someone else has to take charge. But it takes away a lot of rights of the person, so you try to do everything else first if
But
you can.
it's important to remember that each guardianship document is specific to that person. So if someone has guardianship, all the rules and responsibilities are very specific to that person. There's not one size fits all.
All right, well, we'll try to talk about a few of the responsibilities of a financial caregiver before we go on. So who is a financial caregiver?
A representative payee for Social Security, a guardian of the estate, guardian of the person sometimes, a representative payee for services under the VA benefits, just a financial power of attorney is someone that has financial caregiving responsibilities.
I think one of the questions in one of the earlier speakers was about how do you get started talking to someone who needs help, and if you need to talk to your mother, you want to provide some financial guidance, and you're having difficulty getting that conversation started, and this is a resource you've used before.
Absolutely, and really recommend that you do it when you're not upset, you do it not around a holiday, you do it at the beginning of the day, you don't do it at the end of the day, you don't do it when there's an emergency, because you're just setting yourself up for storm and drone.
Yeah.
What?
So the conversationproject.org was their website, and they have a whole step-by-step. I mean, it's a very detailed and well-researched,
It's wonderful.
well-researched website on how to start those difficult conversations in general. Okay, also, if you're a financial caregiver, some things that you could do to kind of improve your own capabilities and some things you need to know.
You have to know your own finances in a number of ways that we do intergenerational financial caregiving and estate planning. So the children do theirs, the older adult does theirs, and the grandchildren do theirs. But everybody has a good sense of financial literacy. How many people think they're financially literate? I believe that we can all do better. But it's really important to really consider yourself financially literate and to understand income, expenses, and what all these terms mean. And to really get your own house in order before you start working with your older adults and the people that you're. Here's our financial caregiving checklist. Inventory as guidelines. In your bag, I put in an emergency document bag that I would encourage you all to use and to put someplace in terms of what's been happening with flooding and with hurricanes and with everything else. You really need to have your insurance both for your house, your car, and your long-term care insurance, and a copy of your Social Security number, and keep it safe. The other piece that we didn't talk about much today is identity theft. And I put a card in there that says identitytheft.gov. It's a wonderful resource. And you really need to look at every year, look at your credit check, and you can do that free. And we have we have the website that you can go to. What else, Michael?
What do you put in an emergency plan? What are you talking about when you talk about a financial caregiving emergency plan?
Everybody should have a plan of where family gets together, who calls who, and to make sure, especially when there's a lot of flooding on the coast and in Houston, it's really important for families to have this written down. Also, there's a website in Texas that I really recommend if you have a disabled family member that you add that so that emergency first responders know that there is somebody vulnerable there, and it's on the state website. What else?
All right. Next 5.
You can set up alerts on bank accounts. There's a lot of things that you can do. The problem is for some banks and financial places, their philosophy is, if it doesn't look safe, what do? We freeze it. And then that means that everything stops until you can figure out what the problem is or if there's a problem. Another big thing is I've gone through clients of very modest means that have, 20 credit cards. So really, anything you can do to simplify finances is really important, and it makes it easier to manage. You also need to develop a calendar and an effective method for financial caregiving, and really think of financial caregiving as a part of your regular caregiving, just like you go to the doctor regularly, you take your medications, you get health care. Financial caregiving is just as big a piece of it.
Yeah. Well, I think we're, just about out of time. I don't know if we have a minute or two for a question. You got a question?
Oh,
I don't know about that, but go ahead.
No.
I want to ask you about this, you just said they're automatic payments. Do you consider autopay on certain bills safe? I'm in that category now, switching from writing a lot of checks to autopay. What's your opinion on autopay?
I autopay everything as much as for convenience as for anything else. Try to write as few checks as possible, and usually I even do checks electronically because there's a better record of it. There's definitely risk for people who aren't as comfortable with technology and things like that, but there's a lot of good technologies out there for monitoring your accounts and making sure that money's not coming out improperly, and I think that's kind of the best thing you can do. I use Mint regularly, which is just a financial kind of budgeting software, and it shows all of your expenses in one place, so you can kind of see what's coming out. And Mint. It's a pretty popular website, but it's pretty complicated at the same time. But yeah, you can just see kind of all your expenses. And
But
things
you
like
can
that.
learn it.
Yeah, it's all. Yeah, you can learn any of that. But there's definitely a lot of solutions out there. But I prefer to have everything automated if I can. Yeah. So
Perfect example.
So checks in general are pretty high percentage-wise of fraud. And also, a family member stealing the checkbook. That happens a lot. So
Unfortunately.
yeah. So checks are definitely an area where there's a lot of fraud, and the banks have a little bit of trouble catching the fraud there on the checks, more so than they do on
Michael,
some of the electronic
there's
stuff.
Yes, I have a question. You mentioned a while ago about sending the copy of the slides or whatever to
Oh, sure.
various groups.
Sure.
I'm with Riverbend, and if you could make one available to Dean Busby.
Of course.
Because we have another group of a lot of older people that I think would be interested.
Of course. Be
Sure.
delighted.
Yeah. And we're local. We live, right around the area, so happy to bring anything by
There's
that
another
you need.
gentleman over here.
See if I can make my way over there.
I may have been lucky that I had this relationship with my mom that we were able to control finances, but I had her on autopay, but I had them sending the bills to me at my house so that I could go over them and make sure that they were valid charges. So that was another.
And that's ideal, because you're a good son and there's good, no, it's true. But for some less than perfect families, there should be a check and a balance. And that works the best from my more than 35 years of experience working with older adults and people with disabilities. Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Cohen, I have a problem with health care management.
Oh, man.
And I have a husband with 3 critical things, one being dementia, so I've got the whole household to run and all. But my biggest time is spent on health care you know, just between Medicare and our secondary, and they have illiterate financial, you know.
Absolutely. Let's talk about, come find me afterwards. We'll talk about it a little bit, but it's a real problem. I mean, how many of you are struggling with explanation of benefits? How many of you are trying to figure out when your health care is being paid by Part A, Part B, Part C, Part D, long-term care insurance, or something else? You need an Excel spreadsheet. And you need an attorney.
Okay. To follow up on the medical care billing, we're fairly recent to Texas. We're only 3 years. But prior to, and I'm 75, I haven't paid outside of prescriptions a medical bill since I've been 65, living in the other states. But when we come here, and I still haven't here, but when you come here, you have a procedure done or a doctor's visit and everything, and you get the bill before they have a chance to be reimbursed.
Right.
And I'm sure elderly people, in particular, responsible, pay those bills. And then they're paid by insurance, and I just think it's ripe for fraud.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, just getting a bill, and this is, I spend a lot of time on the phone on that. Did you bill Medicare? Did you bill my secondary insurance?
Exactly.
And so it's the same thing all the time.
It's a project all by itself.
And that's not age specific. You gotta have to pay it all the time, you know, I mean, that happens all the time. I don't feel age specific.
You know, it's medical care. I mean, and you're going in, it's a new year, right? So we have new deductibles, we have new co-pays, and there's a lot of changes, and we need to be able to manage it. And healthcare is also the most unpredictable driver of our budgets. Thank you so much for staying to the end. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.